everybody, my name is Natalia Leigh and I'm the author of the young adult novels Highborn and Way of Spears, and today I am here with an exciting guest. I am here with Meg LaTorre from iWRITERLY. So Meg LaTorre is a writer, a YouTuber, a developmental book editor, and a former literary agent. On Meg's YouTube channel, iWRITERLY, she geeks out on all things books. Meg also launched something called Query Hack, which is a query critique platform where writers can submit their manuscript queries or Twitter pitches for free feedback. She's written for publications such as Writer's Digest and Savvy Authors on topics related to book publishing, and she can be found writing her own manuscripts and teaching online workshops about writing and editing throughout the year. If you want more information on Meg, make sure to look in the description box down below because I will have all of her info listed there so you can find her Twitter, her YouTube, her website, and everything else you will need to connect with Meg. So Meg, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So the part one of our interview series is over on Meg's channel right now, and that is more her asking me questions about self-publication and my self-publication journey. But today, I'm going to be asking Meg about all things traditional publication. She has worked as a professional in the industry, so I think she's going to have wonderful insight for you guys today. You sent me some of your questions via YouTube and Twitter, and I have compiled all of those to the best of my ability. If I missed any, I apologize. Make sure to leave any questions you have down below because Meg and I will be checking those comments after this video goes live. So without further ado, we are going to jump into the questions. So Meg, I'm coming from a very, of course, self-pub background, so I don't know a whole lot about how traditional publication works. So let's say I am a writer that is looking to connect with agents and start building a query list. What are some tips for finding those agents and knowing who I should or should not query?
Great question. One of the best places to connect with publishing industry professionals is Twitter. As you know, you and I have discussed before on the first video in this series, Twitter is really a hub for literary agents, editors, publishers. So if a writer is looking to kind of get involved in the community, see what publishing professionals are asking, are there trends in the publishing? Maybe everyone's publishing stories about fae or vampires. That's where you can kind of get that, firsthand knowledge. Another really good place if you're looking to accumulate a list for literary agents to query is Manuscript Wishlist. That hashtag is MSWL, and that was created by Jessica Sinsheimer, I think is her name. She's absolutely fabulous, and she basically created this platform where literary agents and now book editors as well will list what age groups and genres they are interested in or seeking. And what I mean by age groups and genres, because a lot of people use a lot of different terms, though they're all kind of the same thing. Age groups is middle grade, young adult, adult. So those are the ages of the intended readership. Genre are the umbrella categories for the type of story. So that would be fantasy, thriller, science fiction, romance, and all that kind of stuff. So when a writer is first looking to find, say, a literary agent that they want to see, to get traditional representation, Twitter's a great place to start just to kind of see who is active. I think author platforms are so important in this day and age, and to really find a literary agent who has their own platform, in my mind, is very, very telling of how skilled that literary agent is in today's marketplace. Now, that's not to say, though, that literary agents who don't have an online platform on places such as Twitter are not a good literary agent. I'm sure there are plenty, but that's just kind of like where I like to start. Google is another great place. If you just kind of type in like literary agencies or top literary agencies, usually kind of find like a starting list. But once you are looking at these literary agencies, you might find that, they have a great website and they seem like, really reputable, but then you might not see published work on the website, which is where you'd want to cross-reference with a website called Publishers Marketplace. You do have to pay a subscription fee to see a lot of the full information there, but Publishers Marketplace is where they house all the publishing deals that happen in today's world. So there you can see what literary agents sell what books. For sometimes they'll kind of talk about like when the books are going to come out and all that fun stuff. But that is just to cross-reference that this is a reputable literary agency that has sold books in the past.
Okay, so let's say that we are looking for agents on Twitter and trying to interact with them there. Is there a certain, are there rules we need to follow, or is there certain, professionalism or etiquette that we should be aware of when we are trying to interact with these agents?
Definitely. So one of the very important things is a lot of writers who are seeking literary representation, or maybe they self-publish a book and they're hoping to then get it traditionally published, they will pitch their work at literary agents, and that is a big no-no. And the same thing for book editors. The only time you want to use Twitter as a pitching platform is during the Twitter pitch contest, and there's tons of those throughout the year. Pit Mad, SFF Pit, Pitch Wars, there's a ton of different ones, but you only want to pitch to these agents, or just in general on Twitter during those contests. So you do not want to pitch at literary agents. Another thing I've noticed a lot of writers do is they will take out their woes and angers and say unkind things. They'll tweet at publishing professionals and say mean things to them. And I do want to caution writers that this is not a good idea if you want to be traditionally published. You're not going to make friends, and the community is very small. So that is a big no-no in the etiquette world.
So just be kind, be professional, and do not pitch agents if they're not asking for it, pretty much. If you're not part of some sort of pitch contest, leave that for the contests or the querying.
Exactly. Honestly, I think kindness can get you such a long way in this field, just showing that you are patient and kind and professional, and really that you're invested in this writing community. That is just good etiquette.
All right, awesome. So moving on to the next question. I have talked to some writers that when they are thinking about traditional publication, they're kind of assuming that they're going to get an editor, and their editor is going to clean up their work for them, so maybe they don't have to do much editing beforehand. So if somebody wants to query and potentially traditionally publish, how many edits do you think that they need to go through? How extensive do those edits need to be before starting to query?
That's a good question. I have talked about this a lot in the past on some of my YouTube videos, and one of the huge red flags that I would see when I was working as a literary agent is that writers are sending their first draft of their manuscript and querying right away, and that is something you do not want to do. That first draft, as I want to say it was Terry Pratchett that said the quote, is you telling yourself the story. Whereas the second, third, fourth, etc. drafts after that are you preparing that story for the eyes of the reader. Ideally, you want to edit your manuscript several times before you even share it with critique partners and beta readers. But you do want to share your story with critique partners and beta readers many times and edit it and get it really polished before you query it. Ideally, you want that manuscript as clean as possible before you query literary agents, because at that point, once a literary agent has it, if you work with an editorial agent, they might edit up somewhat, but you're really going to move pretty quickly to submissions afterwards, ideally. So you want that manuscript to be as clean as possible.
Now, coming from, again, a self-publishing background, there's always a lot of talk about freelance editors and getting your work professionally edited before publication. If you are somebody like myself that is hoping, to be traditionally published, do you feel that we need to hire a professional editor?
This is a question that a lot of people ask, and a lot of people have different opinions on the subject. My opinion on the matter is freelance editing is not required to be traditionally published. If you want to work with a freelance editor and to get your manuscript polished up to par, whatever, if you want to work with a freelance editor prior to querying, you certainly can do so, and many writers have done that. But that is not required, because you will be working with an editor once, obviously, you go out in submission, you sign your contract, and so on. So I think it's more important for writers, especially if they're on a tight budget, to focus on exchanging with critique partners and beta readers to get their book up to snuff. If you have the budget and you can do it, by all means, go ahead. I mean, people like me who are developmental editors would love to work with you. However, that is not a requirement for traditional publishing.
All right. So moving forward with more of the manuscript, so are there specific word counts that writers should be trying to hit based on the genre and age category that they're writing for?
Word counts are very, very important, especially for debut authors or maybe authors who haven't sold a very high amount of books yet. The point of word counts is to ensure that you are within an ideal length. So when you publish a book, if you have a 200,000 word book, that book is going to be more costly to produce because you just have more pages to print. And therefore, if you're a debut author, it's usually a safer investment to have those books be on the shorter side to prove that people want to read your book, that you can really have a very clean, short story. And then once you have a larger platform, people that are guaranteed to purchase your books, then maybe you can write super long novels like, I don't know, the George R. Martins of the world. I wrote a blog on specific word count targets for various age groups and genres, which I will have sent to Natalia and she can link below. But there's various age groups and genres and how the two interlap. So you do want to be careful. For example, like young adult fantasy is a lot of times a lot longer than just young adult contemporary. So you do want to be aware of both.
Yeah, so absolutely make sure to check in the description box below for that link if you want more information on word count. So now moving forward, kind of looking at the actual query, do you have any tips or tricks on how to write a strong query letter? And then I also had somebody ask, are there any ways to stand out to an agent in a good way in your query?
So I'll start kind of with the basics, as I like to call it, but your query letter should follow any submission guidelines that the literary agency laid out. So some agencies will say they want a 1-paragraph plot summary, and plot summary is basically like what you read on the back of a book jacket. It summarizes your book and kind of gives you a snippet of what to expect. It does not give away the ending, and it hints at kind of the overarching plot. I call it plot summary, other people call it different names. Some agencies will say, hey, we want a 1-paragraph plot summary. Others will say, write a query, keep it under a page. Whatever those guidelines are, follow those guidelines first. A good query will include your word count, your age group, and your genre. If you forget any one of those 3 things, a lot of times writers will be auto-rejected in their query, so it's very important to include those things. As far as writing a good query, focus on, generally speaking, a single POV, so that's point of view. If you have multiple POVs in your story, focus on your main protagonist and that emotional journey that they go through. So what is the main plot? What is the thing that kind of drives the story from start to finish? Focus on that rather than rotating POVs in the query, as that can be kind of confusing. Though, of course, there are exceptions and writers have done it well.
So should it be past tense, present tense? Do agents have a preference when it comes to that?
I don't really think so. I think it's just most important to write it in third person. So if your character's first name is Sarah, you want to say, Sarah's mother was murdered and it sent her on this adventure, or whatever that instance is. So you don't want to say, I did this. So you do want to write the plot summary from third person, but whether if it's present or past tense, I don't think it matters as much.
So once you have a clean and polished query letter, how do we know if we can query multiple agents at the same agency? Because I've definitely heard you, Meg, talk about how at most agencies you should choose one agent to query, but how do we know if that is the guideline for that agency, and should we just, go on the safe side, only query one agent? What are your feelings on that?
I think generally speaking, the safe avenue to take is to select a single literary agent at any literary agency that you're submitting to, and do not submit to multiple people at the same time. A lot of times on the submission page, the agency will specify if you can query multiple agents from the same agency. Usually though, that will be if the first agent rejects, then you can submit to another agent. Or they'll say you can submit to multiple agents with different projects. So if you have multiple manuscripts that you've written, then you can do that. However, if they don't specify, I think the underlying rule is that you select a single literary agent to submit to.
Is there a reason behind that? Why they would only want you to query one agent rather than multiple that, might be interested in your manuscript?
Sure. So the reasoning behind that, or at least, in my past experiences, was say a writer submits a young adult fantasy and maybe I didn't like it, but maybe one of my co-agents or, my colleagues were like, oh, I'd really like that. A lot of agencies, the agents will share the manuscripts amongst themselves. So if if the story is really solid and it's got great potential, but maybe it just isn't for them, then a lot of times agents will share across the agency. And so that's why when they say a rejection from one is a rejection from all, is because a lot of times they will share those submissions if they think it has potential and it's just maybe not for them.
So I did receive a question, I believe, via Twitter, and the question was, if you are not a citizen of the United States and you are living in a different country, how can you go about publishing in the U.S.?
I think the goal for writers or authors looking to get literary representation is to find agencies that are based in the country that you want to publish in, or that have a presence and they work with the publishing houses in that country. But because some literary agencies will only represent, say, in Europe, and that's their prime market. Whereas other literary agencies will say that they'll work in the U.S. and they have a partner literary agency that they work with to do global sales and stuff like that. So if you are an international writer, or if you're, let's say, based in the U.S. and you want to have your book published in the U.S., just look for a literary agency that has a presence in the U.S.
Okay, and that for me, I kind of thought of another question I'd like to ask. So again, I've never had an agent, so I don't know how it works, but let's say you are fortunate enough to get an agent. How often will writers actually meet in person with their agents versus just correspond via, calls and, Skype and email and stuff like that?
It really depends on where you and the literary agent are based, each of you respectively. A lot of literary agencies are based in New York City because the publishing houses are also based in New York City. So say if you aren't based anywhere on the East Coast and you're based elsewhere, you might not meet them in person ever or for a very long time unless you go to maybe a writing conference and you're speaking at, I don't know, BookCon or Book Expo or one of the, like a conference, Writer's Digest conference, whatever it is, then maybe you'll meet your literary agent in person. But a lot of times people just kind of call or video chat and just speak over email with their agent.
Yeah, so it's not like a requirement for somebody that would be, say an international writer, they wouldn't be required to fly here and meet with an agent.
Oh no, of course not.
For those writers who have self-published in the past, is it possible to switch to traditional publication, or maybe, the other way? You traditionally publish and now you're switching to self-pub. And do you feel like, this is a great question coming from me too, because I am a self-published author looking now to get traditionally published. So do you think it will be a more difficult avenue if agents know that I have self-published in the past? Is it going to be a tough process because I have books out, but I would be a debut author in the traditional world? How do agents interact with previously self-published authors?
This is going to be different depending on the agent or agency that you're speaking with, but I would say generally speaking, if you self-published in the past and you're looking to be traditionally published now, if you have a new manuscript that has never been published before, you're like a blank slate. They're not judging based off of your previous sales. So if you are a self-published author and you're looking to traditionally publish the book you've already self-published, a lot of literary agencies will not be interested in that book if it has not performed well in sales, so thousands of sales, say. But if you have a new manuscript that has never been published before, literary agents and agencies are very open to kind of talking with any author so long as they have a solid idea and a great storytelling style.
Okay, so for me, when I start querying, is it a good idea to add into my query that I am a previously self-published author? Like, is that something I should do, or should I leave that out because I'm pursuing traditional publication? Like, how should I interact with that?
Personally, and I can only give you my opinion on the subject, is, self-publishing is a part of your background, it's part of your platform. So I don't think that you should or have to exclude that in your query, but maybe in your query say, hey, I previously self-published these two works, and, I'm excited to pursue the avenue of traditional publishing, or however you want to phrase it. It's not a negative thing, and I don't think you should exclude it, but I don't know that you want to spend a lot of time on your self-publishing background in the query itself, because space is tight, but but I'm thinking specifically of like if you haven't sold thousands and thousands of books, then, you know, that's better to utilize that precious query space to talk about maybe your author platform or your YouTube channel or whatever else that you have going on.
Okay, fantastic. I'm really glad I asked that because I kept going back and forth with my personal query, like, should I say that I've self-published? Should I just kind of keep that to myself? So I'm glad I asked that. Okay. So let's say that you are fortunate enough to land an agent. What comes after that? You know, how do you go about getting the book deal with a publishing house? And how many steps between getting an agent and, you know, how many steps are there between getting an agent and actually seeing your book on bookshelves?
That is a very long and has a reputation for being a slow process. But once you have a literary agent, you'll get the contract and for literary representation. And then once both parties agree on the contract and they have it signed, next, if you're working with an editorial agent, will come kind of the editing and polishing process. So maybe the agent says, hey, I want to tweak the ending, or maybe let's tweak some of the character development here. Let's add some world building there, whatever that they want to add or change to that manuscript. And obviously that the writer themselves agrees with, because it's not like a dictatorship. It's, you know, it's a partnership. It's a two-way dialogue. So once the writer and the literary agent have gotten the manuscript to the place that they want it, then the writer starts on the thing called submission. And so at that point, the literary agent will put together a list of editors from publishing house that they want to submit to. And usually those editors, just like literary agents, will be open to select age groups and genres. And they'll have their preferred styles or things that they like to see in books. And so it's the literary agent's job to know those things and to know who would, like, what would be the best home for the writer's manuscript. The submission process can take anywhere from weeks to a year, 2 years. It really depends on how quickly editors get back, what time of year they send it. Maybe the editors have just signed a couple of writers who have very similar manuscripts, so it's really kind of a lot about timing. But then once you then have that contract signed, the editor and the writer will then work closely to, again, edit the book, get it ready, and that's usually a year and a half, 2 year process. It really depends, but that's usually a several year process, which will then lead up obviously to the book being published.
So previously in the video on your channel, we were discussing self-publishing, and I think it's really interesting because some authors may choose to self-publish because of how quickly the process can move. Like once you are ready, you get to set your own deadlines, you get to set your own release date, so it occurs much faster than the traditional publication might. So again, you know, if you are a writer out there that is trying to make a decision between self-publication and traditional publication, this is something that you should be aware of and think about as well. You know, how quickly do you want this book out there? How much patience do you have? So make sure always to do your research before making your decision. So in the video on Meg's channel, we definitely discussed more about author platform. But Meg, how does having an author platform influence an agent's interest in your work?
One of the things that we discussed was how it's very important to establish an author platform prior to publication. So to really develop yourself in the space. And I mean, essentially the goal, if you have a large author platform, you know, hopefully would then also have people that would more readily purchase your book once you have a book that is published and available to the public. So author platform does play a role into it. So for people, maybe famous booktubers or author tubers, or famous people online, say celebrities, you know, they might be more appealing initially for a literary agent, say, to pick up and work with, and obviously publishing houses then as well. But I think although author platforms are so important and it's really great to have a large one, it's also a lot about the book itself. So how strong is the story? Is your protagonist likable or relatable or interesting enough to follow throughout the whole manuscript? Do you have a solid plot? Is the conclusion of the story satisfying? You still need to have all those important book writing things in addition to an author platform. You cannot skip that step in the process, which I think some people might kind of overlook when they say, hey, this person has 100,000 followers and they get a book publishing deal. They didn't have to do any work. And you're like, no, they really did have to do a lot of work to build that platform and then to write a book.
Right. So even if you're somebody that, let's say you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and you have a very small author platform, there's definitely still merit in good work. So even if you have that tiny author platform, if the work speaks for itself, then you shouldn't have to worry about it too much.
It's always good to try and build your author platform to have a bigger one, but really the work should speak for itself. And the whole point of publishing a book is having a great story. So I think story comes first, author platform kind of a close second if you have to rank it. But really, as you said, it's really more important to have a solid story.
Fantastic. Now, going back to some of the differences between self-publication and traditional publication, we did speak pretty extensively about marketing on the self-pub side. But how does marketing work in traditional publication, and how much marketing should a traditionally published author, be prepared to do for themselves?
So unlike what the traditional publishing industry was like, 5, 10, 20 years ago, where the publishing houses did a lot of the marketing on behalf of the authors, the industry today has changed very much so, and a lot of writers don't like to hear this. Both traditionally published authors and self-published authors need to do marketing for their books and essentially create an author platform. It is not 100% the publishing house's job to market your book. So in addition to whatever the publishing house chooses to do, and a lot of times they'll select which authors and books receive the most marketing during that quarter. So some of the things that a traditionally published author might want to do is maybe establish a presence on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or wherever your target audience is really congregating. But you'll want to do like a blog tour or video hops or newsletters. You really want to do basically all of the same marketing things that self-published authors do as a traditional published author.
All right, fantastic. So as we are wrapping this up, do you have one bit of advice for those authors that are looking to get an agent and hopefully a traditional publication deal?
For writers looking to get an agent, I would say the biggest thing is to edit your manuscript very, very thoroughly, even before you start querying. So as we kind of discussed earlier, really edit it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times with beta readers and critique partners, and don't be afraid to get your work out there. A lot of writers have a fear of sharing their work with other people, whether it's beta readers or fellow writers, because I think they're afraid of other people stealing their work or their ideas, but that is something that is so important that writers will need to work through to overcome, because regardless of whether you self-publish or traditionally publish, ultimately your ideas and your work, you want it to be in front of the reader, therefore you will be ultimately sharing your ideas. But even along that process, if you want to do traditional publication, you'll have a lot of people looking at your work, like your literary agent, an editor, marketing people, whoever. You'll have a lot of people kind of interacting with the work, and that's just something that's really important to kind of work through. The last thing is to stay organized. If you are querying a lot of literary agents, and a lot of people will talk about querying dozens or hundreds of literary agents before they found their one agent, you need to keep organized to make sure that when you're querying, you're not querying the same literary agent multiple times, or maybe you want to keep track of when they will reply. And if a no means an automatic rejection, then you maybe want to keep track of when that time frame is. And it's just really all about staying organized and staying on top of it.
So it's interesting that you said that, because I haven't really started the process of querying just yet, but I'm a bullet journal person, and I actually already have a big spread in my bullet journal to be keeping track of every single agent that I query, what agency they're part of, what kind of either requests or a rejection or, a no response. I have sections for all of that, so that's one of the ways I'm going to be doing it, but make sure to do your research. It feels like that's what we keep coming back to, is be aware of the market, be aware of your audience, your genre, and do all of your research. So everybody, this has been so much fun today. I was so excited to have this opportunity to be here with Meg as somebody that is interested in traditionally publishing my novels in the future. It has been wonderful to have the opportunity to talk to her and to ask all of your questions. Remember that if we didn't get to your question, or maybe we kind of made you think of a new question that you would like to ask, drop those in the comments down below so that we can get to those for you. As always, Meg's information will all be listed in the description box. Make sure to check out her YouTube at iWRITERLY. It is absolutely wonderful. She has such amazing videos that I literally have watched them multiple times just to continually hear all of her good advice. So make sure you check that out. Check out her website if you're interested. And Meg, thank you so much for being here with me today. I truly enjoyed it. So you guys, I hope you enjoyed it as well. Let us know what you thought of it in the comments down below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!